Hey guys, it's Christy and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about the top 10 eyeshadow palettes for the spring. So before we get into it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel before you leave. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and let's get into it. So today I've pulled 10 palettes in no particular order that I think are perfect for the spring. So the first one I've pulled is from Lunar Beauty. And this is the Nude Prism palette. So first of all, the packaging. How can we not see spring with all these beautiful cherry blossom leaves all over? So beautiful. And then when you open it up, you just get this really light color story. You do get some depth and dimension, but for the most part, the top row and the shimmer row, they just give this light kind of look to the palette, which I think is just very, very spring. I think it's so, so pretty. These pinks in particular just give me all of the spring vibes. I love this palette. This is such a beautiful, beautiful neutral palette, but I also love that the shadows are buildable. So you can wear those really light, springy looks, and you can definitely darken it up if you want to, but for the most part, I just very much see a spring palette in these pinks, and these shimmers are so incredibly smooth. They look so beautiful. They almost give an ethereal eye kind of effect. It's beautiful. So definitely, if you have this one, now's a good time to dig this one out. Moving into Colourpop for a minute, I have a recent purchase of mine, and this is the Pretty Please palette. So this one is a very light color story. I did try this one out in a testing new drugstore makeup video recently, and even in that video I observed that even the deeper shades in here are lightly pigmented. This is a very, very light palette, but I think it's beautiful, especially if you're near my skin tone, or if you really like very light eyeshadow palette, something that you're going to feel comfortable wearing every day. Maybe you want to slowly dip your toes into more colorful shadows. I think this is a good one. This first row here is all Super Shock shadows, and they're so beautiful. Then you have some matte with sparkles, then some regular shimmers, and some mattes. But it is just that very light pinky purple, very, very feminine color story. So I think this one is absolutely beautiful for spring. Okay, an older Colourpop palette that I wanted to mention is Blush Crush. It is very pretty. The only depth you get is from these two shades here, which are kind of similar. But if you have this one, now is a great time to dig this one out for those light pinks and peaches. I think this is so pretty for spring. So of course I had to pull out Blush Crush. It is just a really easy go-to peachy pink palette. Another incredibly springy palette from Colourpop is the So Very Lovely palette. So this one is one that I am excited to reach into more. I actually really want to try pairing this one with the Pretty Please palette, because this one is going to give a little bit more pigment, a little bit more depth and dimension. You still get a really great range of shimmers, of peaches and purples, and there's just a little bit more depth. So I think this one paired with the Pretty Please palette, seeing them side by side, I think that's true. I think they'll complement each other nicely. If you even only just have this one, I think it's so pretty. I think this light purple here is just absolutely gorgeous. I can't wait to play with this one more as well. This one really lives up to its name. You can't look at this one and not think that it's a lovely palette, because it really, really is. So very excited to reach into this one again. Okay, let's go to the high-end spectrum. This next one is from Viseart, and this is the Paris Love Letter palette. So this one is another one that is very lightly pigmented. So this is another one that is very, very light. You get a lot of these lighter peachy tones here. You really only get one deep shade. You get this really pretty green here, a purple. This is a perfect spring color story if I have ever seen one. I really do enjoy this one for those lighter looks. This is not one I reach for if I'm looking for a lot of depth and dimension whatsoever. But in the springtime, this just looks fresh. So I think this one is absolutely perfect. Plus the Viseart formula really is phenomenal. I do think that they are so expensive, but the formula is incredible. And this color story is definitely one of the most spring color stories in my entire collection. Next is a palette that was released around holiday time, and it seemed like everyone was on the train that this one should have been released in the spring based on the color story. And this is from Natasha Denona. This is the Retro Glam palette. And I totally see what people are saying about this. Between the light pinks and the light greens, it definitely does look a little bit more spring than anything else. I think this one can be a good winter palette, but I think January, February when I think of that, because there is a certain frostiness to it. But overall, I do totally agree. This is a very spring palette with these very light greens. This is not a palette that is going to give you a ton of depth and dimension. These two shades here are pretty deep, but they are shimmers. And the deepest green is this one right here. So again, this is just not a super deep, dark, grungy palette. This is going to give you those very light, almost pastel green kind of shades. I think this palette would play very well with the pastel palette, but I think this is just a stunning palette. I really loved it. I'm definitely going to be playing with it a lot more in the spring as well. And just looking at some of the more shimmery greens, it's got these more frosted kind of greens to it that I think are just super appropriate for spring. That's the type of green I'm gonna go for in those fresh springy kind of months. And a fairly obvious choice is the Natasha Denona Pastel palette. So I was going to whip out the mini pastel, and that's going to be kind of an honorable mention. I think it's better when paired with this. This is obviously very, very springy. There's no doubt about that. So you have these mint green and baby blue, some very light pinks in here, and some mint greens. This palette is a very spring palette for very obvious reasons. I especially very much think of Easter when I see this one. So I highly recommend digging this one out now if you have it. I'm going to be trying a lot harder to use this in conjunction with the mini pastel and just try and create a lot of really fall spring-like looks with the two of them. Next, from Huda Beauty, is the Mercury Retrograde palette. So I believe this one is now discontinued, but this one is just a classic spring palette for good reason. This mint green is so beautiful. These pinks and purples, gorgeous. Even the brownie neutrals, but the thing with the brownie neutrals is they also have somewhat of an ethereal effect to them. One thing I always say about Huda Beauty is that she does texture unlike anybody else. She has the best range of textures, and they perform so well. So while you can get some more depth out of this one than some of the others I've mentioned, I think this is such a pretty, colorful, but ethereal palette. I just think it's absolutely stunning. And some of these shades are so incredibly reflective. I think if you have this palette, you must stick this out for spring. It's very important that you do. And then another Huda palette that I think is incredibly beautiful for spring that was also released near holiday is the Rose Quartz palette. Again, we have all of these light pinks and purples and some very ethereal looking purples, which I think are the coolest shades. And then even the browns have a purplish pinky tone to them. So overall, this is just a very pinky purpley tone palette that again is just so perfect for spring. And when I first got this palette, when it first came out, all I could think was how this would have been such a good spring palette. I'm pretty sure I said that in my review as well, but this is a must if you have it for this spring. And the last palette I wanted to mention in today's video is from Sigma, and this is the Enchanted palette. This is really beautiful. So this one, I honestly debated on putting this one in because I also think of this one as a bit of a fall palette with some of these deep tones down here. But then you look down here and there's these really pretty pinky, light pink shades. You get a gold in here. This one just makes me think of sunshine. But all of these pinky purples I just think are so appropriate for spring. I think you can get a pretty ethereal look with this palette. And again, I feel like I've said that word so many times in this video. So ethereal definitely is something that I think of when it comes to spring makeup, clearly. So pastels and ethereals. But I definitely think you can get that sort of vibe with these especially. These are just so light and pretty. And even this lighter green here I think is beautiful. But that is it. Those are the top 10 spring palettes in my collection. So let me know down below your favorite springtime palettes. Let me know if you have any of these, if you're gonna dig any of them out now. But thank you so very much for watching. If you're new here, I hope you'll consider subscribing before you go. I do upload at least 3 new videos every single week. Thank you again so very much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!